Okei, tervetuloa kaikki tähän Vaadin 7 presentaatioon. Oh, just kidding. We are going to have this in English, not in Finnish. So welcome to Vaadin 7 presentation. My name is Joonas Lehtinen. I'm from Vaadin team. Basically found the Vaadin team 12 years ago. Before going into presentation, let's do a quick poll. Who of you are using Vaadin already? Oh wow, quite a few. How many of you have been testing Vaadin 7 already? Not so many. Okay. How about TWT? How many of you are using TWT, Google Web Toolkit? Not so many. Oh, 20% or so. Excellent. So today I'm going to first give a quick, maybe 25-minute introduction to Vaadin in general, how it works, what are the principles behind it, give a small coding demo to kind of give hands-on experience for those guys who haven't been using Vaadin yet, how it looks like, and then speak about what's new in Vaadin 7. And after that, the third part is basically you asking questions about Vaadin 7, what's happening around Vaadin, or whatever questions you have about Vaadin. So I hope that this is the most important part. So let's get started. Vaadin, you all know that it's a Finnish word meaning reindeer, right? Or more specifically, female reindeer. We have really many words for reindeers in Finland because in the northern Finland there are so many of them. It's a user interface framework for building web applications, and the weight is on the word applications. So this is not for building websites, it's more for building kind of business-like applications that occupy the full screen that the users can use for the whole of the day. Could use keyboard navigation, drag and drop, and so forth. And as you can see, the logo actually looks like a reindeer. But the idea over there is that we are kind of hiding HTML behind Java. We are putting an abstraction layer on top of HTML platform and allowing you to code those applications fully in Java. So you don't have to write a single line of JavaScript or HTML in order to build those rich applications. But you can run them on any device that can run HTML or HTML5. So why would somebody want to do something like this? I have had many arguments about it. Many people think that it's really cool to program in JavaScript. For me, it's mostly about this thing. These guys who are working in the enterprise, using applications in the enterprise, they are also consumers. So this is what they are using today when they go home. Well, sometimes also at the workplace, but mostly when they go home. So they're using Facebook, they're using all of those cool services in the web with great user experiences. They look nice, they behave nice, they are like really flashy and really smooth. So these guys actually know that the web applications can be smooth, they can be nice. So the expectations are that when they are ordering the next application from you guys that you are building and delivering to these guys, that the experience would be something similar. So if you are kind of delivering something else, they might be disappointed. And unfortunately, for the most part, what they're using actually today in the work, the reality is something else. It's something like this. Sorry about the guy who designed this. I don't know who it is. But this is unfortunately reality in many places. So they are expecting Facebook and they're expecting like really smooth HTML5 based application and seeing this on a daily basis at work. So let's think about what's the difference between consumer applications and business applications. Let's say we have a consumer service with 1 million users. It might not be that big. There might just be like 10 views in that service. And then when we are building that service, we might think that we are investing, let's say, €1 per monthly user for building the service. So it's kind of $1 million project, quite hefty project actually. For a business system, let's say we have 500 active users that are using your application on a daily basis. And it's quite a bit larger application. There are maybe 50 views, but not that large anyways. Business applications have many views. And let's say we invest like 500 times more into that application, into building that application per user. so it costs like 250,000, right? So if you calculate how much it does cost per view, of course the application is more than just the user interface, but if you calculate how much does it cost per view, you can actually see that these guys building Facebooks and Twitters, they can use quite a bit of money in order to build those views. So if they're having like budget of 100,000 euros per view to smooth out all the bugs to make the user experience great, it's kind of no wonder that the user experience is great. But if you guys, when you're building business applications, are using budget of 5,000 euros per view, and then the customers expect that they get Facebook, it's not going to work too nicely. So that's a problem. And the question mainly that we are kind of thinking on a daily basis is how we could get similar kind of user experience that these guys are getting when they are consumers. Also when they are business users, when they are working, when they are using the systems that you guys built. And that's actually a pretty tough question. In case of Vaadin, we basically are kind of trying to tackle this with 3 different key ideas behind the framework. So first of all, there are rich components in the framework. So it basically means user interface components, data sources, and themes. So these are the type of components that are in Vaadin framework. For the user interface part, it's of course all about those components that are built into the framework. So you guys have probably seen this demo. If you go to demo.vaadin.com, you can try out the core components in the framework. You can choose, let's choose anything and try it out, how it works, see source code, how it looks like, so that you can learn how these components work. We are also working with a new sampler demo for Vaadin 7. This is still work under construction, but I can show you a sneak peek preview of it as well. So let's go there. So it's a bit different kind of way of browsing those samples. So you can kind of fly through different samples over there. Let's see, value input samples, or maybe a basic sample, just a button, so you can see how the button looks like. Okay, let's take a look of the native button. We could customize it a bit. Maybe say that it should be like occupying the full space given to it, like this, and then we can give a bit more space for it, so it's a larger button, and so forth. And maybe have some kind of description out of it. It's still work under construction, but this is something that is going to replace Vaadin 7 when this sampler comes out. Yeah, there's also kind of new sample on what kind of applications, what kind of user experience you can build with Vaadin. So let me show this one. So it kind of tries to underline that you can build quite a bit more rich applications with Vaadin than just web pages. So this also occupies the full screen. After you log in, you get a dashboard. There are new charting components that we are working on at the moment. You can have like interactive graphics over here. List a lot of data on the screen. So there are 5,000 rows on this table, and it loads more data from the server side while I'm scrolling, and that's totally automated. You can test things like drag and drop things around, or build reports by just drag and dropping things around. This demo will also be released in, I guess, a couple of weeks. Or you can play with it at our expo booth as well. You can also run Vaadin on mobile devices. So there is all the components run on mobile devices by default, but there's also a special library that kind of mimics iOS look and feel. Really powerful feature is a directory. You guys have been building an amazing number of new add-on plugin components for Vaadin. At the moment there are 280 of these available. So you could go to Vaadin/directory and see all those components. Take a look of any of these, see kind of source code examples, screenshots, demos on how these components behave. So this is like really important part of the Vaadin framework. The philosophy has been such that we try to kind of keep the core minimal and only include components that are really needed in the product core, and then let this add-on directory to cover all of the rest of the use cases and rest of the components. Themes. There are a couple of themes included in Vaadin. So the default theme, actually I could show this live. So the default theme is something like this. It's meant for building business applications, so boring business applications, banking, insurance. That's actually what is mostly done with Vaadin. All kind of business applications. But there are also a couple of more cool themes. So Runo theme, it's more kind of rounded theme where it looks a bit more like Web 2.0. Then there is also Chameleon theme, where you can actually customize the color. So let's take maybe this view, and then we choose some other base color over here, let's say orange, and then I have orange theme, and then I can go and download the theme as theme jar and start extending and changing colors and what have there in CSS. And there is also totally customized themes. So this one is built on top of base theme in Vaadin and kind of shows that you can fully customize the look and feel. Of the components in the theme. Okay, the third part is data sources. Vaadin actually have had since 2002 a really powerful data binding model. So basically means that there are just three things. So there are containers, items, and properties. So you could think these as, let's say, property here is a one seat in this theater. So there is just one guy sitting on that seat. So it's like one value on that seat. The item would be the full row of guys. So we have always know that on the seat number 15 on the second row there is one property. And the container would be the whole theater. So basically like 2D model. And there are also some extra aspects for these containers like ordering and filtering and so forth. But the key idea is that there are just kind of three main interfaces that you can implement and bind any kind of data to the UI components. And there are quite a few implementations around for these. So in most cases you don't have to implement them by yourself. You can use any of the existing implementations to glue your UIs to data. Or of course you can also put the data in the component, not just like bind it to a data source. Second aspect is that this is a combination of server-side programming and client-side programming. So let's think about normal web application. So you have like JavaScript, some kind of communication layer, web server, and a backend. And it's always the same. You must have these layers in your application, whatever framework you are using to build that web application. So for example, in Google Web Toolkit, you are always building 4 different layers. Google Web Toolkit has a really nice feature that it can compile from Java to JavaScript. So you don't actually have to write directly in JavaScript, but you write in Java and you compile to JavaScript. But you have to build those 4 different layers: backend, web server, communications, and the client-side code. One is actually quite different. In Vaadin, you have to basically write 2 layers instead of 4. So you cannot manage without backend. You have to have the data and the business logic somewhere. But the user interface is actually sitting on the web server, not on the client. So it kind of reduces the number of layers that you have to write to half. And that's actually the key to why it's quite fast to write applications in Vaadin. In all of these frameworks, you can of course write code on all of these layers if you really choose to. As a comparison, JavaScript frameworks, it's also writing 4 different layers. So how does it actually work? How does it manage to kind of give you an opportunity to write code on the server side? Let's take a simple example. We have kind of a couple of components on our server-side code, and then we wire up a listening method over there. So when somebody clicks the button, something happens. And this something actually modifies the screen, but on the server side. So when we go to this application with our web browser, what happens? It loads HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and so forth. So it's actually loading all of those things that you are not writing. These come bundled with the framework. And it's always the same set. So it's basically kind of rendering engine or terminal application that is downloaded, not your application. It's quite hefty, 800 kilos or so. It gets compressed to 250K, and you can also reduce it by kind of leaving out some widgets. So actually this thing includes implementation of widgets, not your application. So it knows that how to render a tree, how to render a button, but it doesn't know anything about how your application works. It just gets instructions from your application. So what happens next is that with those instructions, it puts widgets on the screen. And then we can start interacting with those. We write something on the widget, click a button, and it sends an HTTP request over the wire to the web server. And this HTTP request is basically really tiny. It only contains those changes that we have put since the previous HTTP request. In this case, we've modified the text field and pressed the button. So there are two things that are sent over the wire, 150 bytes or so. That goes into your code on the server side. So you get the event, you can read those values, and you can modify the user interface as you wish. After you have done this, Vaadin basically takes over and analyzes which part of the screen has changed, and then sends a request back to the, or kind of returns data with the same HTTP request to the client side. And this data is actually JSON message containing instructions on how to modify the screen, what to put on the screen. In this case, put this label over there, or notification over there. So let's try it out. Let's build a simple application from scratch, or almost from scratch this time. So what I actually have the application, so I show it first to you how it looks like, and then let's try to recreate it. Close a couple of tabs. So it should be /notes. So this is a note-taking application. So we have a split panel in the middle of the screen. Then we have a list of, I think, 500 notes over here. This gets loaded from a database. So I'm using H2 database over here. So I can select one of these notes, start editing the title, devox memo, and edit the text as I wish, and let's just save. And now I have the devox memo over here, and it's persisted back to the database. A pretty simple application, but writing this from scratch in JavaScript and writing some kind of backend for it wouldn't be like trivial task to do. So let's see the application itself. This is a simple Maven project over here. So I have web XML. Basically, this just declares that we are using Vaadin servlet to host this application. So it's just one servlet that comes in with the product. And we say for the servlet that all the URLs are mapped to this servlet. And the key thing here is here, and this is new in Vaadin 7. We declare that the user interface served by the servlet is called Notes UI. So this is the class that we are going to write. Then we have a couple of classes, but let's start by deleting these. Always a good idea in demo. I leave the backend because I don't want to bore you with backend stuff. I can show what is in there in a while. But let's create a new user interface. So in Vaadin 7, you are building the user interface out of UI classes. This is basically the thing that is shown on the screen, or within a div if you are embedding this to some other web page. So let's see. Let's create a new Java class and call that Notes UI and extend a UI object like this. And now we have empty UI over here. Maybe it should show something over here. Let's do it simply. Set content. So put some content to UI. Let's see. We need some layout anyway, so let's create that. Horizontal split panel. Split. So we create the new split panel, and the state is stored in the Vaadin session. So all of the state of the UI components is stored while you are using the application. So the content will be split. That should be showing on the screen. Let's refresh this one. So we have now one split panel. Not too fancy yet. So what we need is a list of nodes. So let's create a table. Let's say table list, or maybe just nodes. So this is an empty table. And then we can just add it to split panel. Let's see, split, add component, nodes. See what it looks like. It doesn't look like much. As you can see, the table is actually over here, this 1 pixel line. It's really narrow table. So let's make it a bit larger one. So we say node set size full so that it occupies the full screen like this. So now it's over here. But we need some data to that table. So for that we are using backend. Let's say nodes set data source, and let's get it from the backend. Get container. This is basically container data model that we are getting from the backend, and then we can show that over here. So in this case, it's a database table. So we have 3 columns: IDs, texts, and titles. So there are a lot of stuff in here, and it actually creates new queries to the database while I'm scrolling. So it only loads those rows from the database that are shown on the screen. But this is not quite what we had in mind. So let's configure the table a bit. Let's say, what should we be doing? Nodes, set visible columns. And we only want to show, let's see, titles, like this. So now we are only show titles. Actually, we should show what is in the backend, so that there is not too much matching happening. So the backend, this is actually quite long class, but it's only because I create random data in this, and if the database happens to be empty. So there's basically only one method that I'm using over here. So it's this get nodes container. So it sees that checks that the connection pool is up and running, and then only has one line of code. It creates a new SQL container. This is a SQL container data model, and connects that to a database table. So this is kind of simplest way of connecting to a database. And then I say that, hey, the name of the table is nodes, and I'm using this connection pool, and that's it. So single line of code, and I get connection to a database. In real life, you might prefer to use like JPA instead of this kind of JDBC connection. But it works in this demo. So let's close this one. And where were we? So our application looks like this. What we want to do next is to show contents of those nodes on the right side. So what we can do here is say nodes, add item listener, item click listener, new item click listener. Actually, one small enhancement in Vaadin 7 is that instead of writing add listener as you would do in Vaadin 6, I'm writing add item click listener, so the auto-completion works better. So when somebody clicks that item, we get an event. For the event, what we should be showing is the contents of the node. So let's create a node over here. Let's see. We create the, say, label. So it's empty, and we should be using HTML content mode for it, like this. And let's put that on the screen. So we add it to split node, and then when somebody clicks a node, we should show the data over there. So we say node set should be set value, and it should be just like, where should we getting it? We have an event, we get clicked item, basically the row on the table, and from that we can get property with the ID, so the ID would be text ID, so like this. So we are fetching from this item the contents of the text. So now we can actually see these nodes on the right. Okay, next step would be building a component for editing these nodes. So in Vaadin it's quite typical that you are building new components all the time. So let's, instead of using a label over here, we should use node editor component. And something like this. Of course it's missing, so let's create that. And it's just the normal Java class. We extend custom component, so that actually is just a kind of composition of server-side components. And we get an empty component over here. What am I doing wrong? Oh, no, editor. I thought I had forgotten Java all the way. Cannot do constructors anymore. Okay, so what we should be having in a node? We should have title editor and text editor. So let's create this here. So text field, title, like this, and then rich text area, should we call it text, like this, and then just put these on the screen. So we need some kind of layout. Let's create the vertical layout and just add these guys into the layout. So now we should have like full component over here that we can reuse. It doesn't do much yet, but let's try it out. So refresh, and actually we should be putting this on the screen as well. So set composition root, kind of the root of the composition over here. So now we have the editor here on the right. Maybe we should do some layouting to make it look a bit nicer. So let's see. Set size full, and also the layout should be occupying the full screen. And maybe we should also, let's see, say title, set width. You can also use Visual Editor for editing those layouts instead of writing everything by hand. Today it's not there yet for Vaadin 7, so that's the reason why I'm not demoing Visual Editor for Vaadin 7, but it might be handy for this kind of layouts. So set size full, and then also say that this text should be occupying most of the screen over here. So something like this. So now it kind of occupies the full screen. Of course it doesn't do much, it doesn't actually edit any nodes. For that we should be connecting these two guys together. So now in the nodes editor we have this set value for the label, but instead of having a label we have this node editor, so we have, let's say, set node. And let's say that the node is of type item. And let's create this method over there. And when we are setting the node, there's a new, we have kind of redesigning the whole form concept in Vaadin 7. Instead of using form components, you can actually bind any kind of layouts with fields to data source. So for that we can use field groups. So field group, it's just a group of fields, and we say that we want to create field group for this item, and then just bind it. Bind member fields from this object, this layout basically, or this component over here, and that's it. So now we are binding from the data source to those fields. Only one thing is missing, that it doesn't magically guess that these fields are the ones to which field we should be binding which properties. Or actually it does guess magically if they happen to be matching with the names, but does not use any magic. We try to kind of reduce amount of magic in Vaadin 7 from Vaadin 6, and that's I think, good direction for being more explicit in what's happening. So we can just say property ID. So this one is title ID, no, yeah, and another one was text ID. So now we can actually show these here on the editor. I plan to also add a save button over here that would just call commit from the backend, but I guess you believe that it works. So we leave a bit more time for questions in the end. So what do you think? Is the programming model such that you would be using or could be using that? I'm asking you guys who are not using Vaadin today. No one saying nothing. Okay. The demo is actually at the GitHub, so if you want to take a look of that. You don't have to write down the URLs. I posted the slides to SlideShare, so you can take a look of the URLs over there. So the third principle for making or raising the abstraction level and making it faster to build UIs in Vaadin is embracing Java. This basically means that we think Java platform has such a great set of tools and ecosystem around it that we shouldn't be kind of trying to reinvent those. Instead, we are building on top of these. So first of all, this is running on top of real JVM on the server side. So it means that you can actually use any language that runs on top of JVM to program these UIs. At the moment, I see Scala getting most traction in Vaadin community for building UIs, and there is actually a really nice add-on called Scaladin that adds Scala type of APIs on top of Vaadin. So I'm not a Scala programmer, but I gave a presentation about Scala where I was live coding one application, and for that I practiced it by kind of coding it first in Java and then in Scala. And then I measured that, hey, it actually looks like I'm saving half of the code lines in Scala version. So it was really pretty, at least for a kind of first try of Scala. We basically support all the different most popular web browsers. With Vaadin 6 we were even supporting like IE6. With Vaadin 7 we are supporting everything from IE8 and all the other browsers out there. The key thing, at least for the organizations that are migrating from Swing to web or from Visual Basic to web, is that there is nothing to install to the client side anymore. There are not even browser plugins and no client-side JVM to install and maintain. And this is, even being like a simple thing that web applications give to you, it's actually quite a huge thing for companies that they can kind of combine rich user experience with the deployment model where you're not actually deploying anything to the client side. You can deploy the server side basically to any kind of Java server that can run servlets or portlets. You can also run Vaadin applications, Vaadin UIs as portlets. Most clouds that can run Java can run also Vaadin. There is a lot of tooling around. We are publishing an Eclipse plugin with the visual editor and a lot of wizards and helpers in there. JetBrains is doing IntelliJ plugin. There is a small plugin for NetBeans. Maven support is really nice. So there are many archetypes, and all the add-ons are in Maven repository, so you can just create the new project from archetype and use all the tooling made for Maven. Oh, this is actually a screenshot of the idea. It's a really nice one. So, the second part, Vaadin 7. Our plan was to release Vaadin 7 at Java 1, basically 2 months ago, and we failed miserably. So we had beta at Java 1, and then we had a backup plan that, hey, we are going to postpone this to Devox and release this in Devox. And we failed miserably again. So instead of now being able to publish Vaadin 7 stable and final and general availability and whatnot edition, we still are in beta. We are in beta cycle that is where we are releasing almost weekly beta releases, and we are today at beta 8. So it's quite far, but we decided that we are gonna fix all the bugs or all the major bugs first before claiming it to be stable. At the moment, it looks like that we are seeing release candidate in the first part of January. So there are basically 3 different themes in Vaadin 7, what we wanted to do. The first one was empowering developers. What it means that in Vaadin 6 we kind of pushed developers in the certain development model that they always had to do things on the certain way. And sometimes people weren't too enthusiastic for us pushing too much abstraction between them and what they wanted to do. So the abstraction is still there, but with Vaadin 7 we try to make it much simpler for you guys to go through the abstraction when or if you want to go through the abstraction. So this is about many details, so let's not go into there. Another thing is extendability. So to me, at least, the biggest thing that happened to Vaadin in past years is add-on ecosystem and the directory. So there being like hundreds of add-ons, it's a huge thing because those add-ons are doing things that wouldn't be there without you guys. So we thought that, hey, this is working really well, let's go even further there. And that even further meant for us that we are adding more extension points and we are making it more easy to build those add-ons. So we basically kind of reinvented how you are building add-ons. And then there's tons of cleaning up. We are basically been quite a lot API backwards compatible since 2002 already. So that's huge amount of time for a Java framework. And in 2002, we thought that there are multiple terminals that are used to show these applications. So we had, of course, traditional web terminal that was rendering traditional web pages, but we had like prototypes of WAP and J2ME and Swing and Windows and so forth, all those cool technologies. And they just didn't work too well. So it's only web today, it's only Ajax today, it's only HTML5 platform today. And because of that, we can kind of remove some over-generic naming and stuff from Vaadin and clean up places where these 10 years have been kind of piling up mess in the APIs. So there are quite a lot of cleaning up. So let's go to a couple of things that have been done in Vaadin 7. I'm not going to go through all the changes because there are so many of these, but just going to point out 5 or 6. So the first one is that we have kind of merged Google Web Toolkit directly into Vaadin. So what does it mean is that we have been using Google Web Toolkit for 5 years now already, and we have been really happy with that. It's basically kind of technology that we have been using to build our widgets, and it has been helping with the browser compatibility. Now we kind of moved full copy of Google Web Toolkit directly inside Vaadin Framework. So there is no dependency anymore. It's a full package. So this is also about how we are kind of supporting the framework. Now we can support the full package, all of it at the same time. But we also try to push things back to Google Web Toolkit. So whenever we are fixing bugs, we are pushing these back. As a kind of side benefit or side On the side, what it makes Vaadin is that it makes it GWT compatible. It means that you could actually run almost any Google Web Toolkit application that works with Google Web Toolkit 2.5 today on top of Vaadin. Basically just replace the jar names. And that kind of confuses people. When should I go client side, when should I go server side? We think that the server side is the way to go for most of the time. It's optimized for productivity. Instead of 3 layers or 4 layers, you are having just backend and the web server layer. So it can reduce layers and amount of code to write. But sometimes you want to have like full control over what's happening in the DOM tree, and then you can go to client side and do whatever is possible to do on HTML5 or Google Web Toolkit directly inside Vaadin. So let's take a quick look about the architecture from this point of view. So there are these two servers, backend server and the web server. In many cases, they might be even the same. You are writing backend server stuff. It's totally independent of Vaadin, and then the user interface built on top of Vaadin components. And you can add more components on that layer quite easily, and your custom components and add-ons written by third parties. For a while, you have been also been able to write client-side widgets, and these are actually compiled from Java to JavaScript. Also in Vaadin 7, I'm going to turn to that later, you can write client-side widgets in pure JavaScript as well. Themes. But what is new, you can also write UIs on the client side in Vaadin. So now you can write on server side as well as on the client side. So you can do things like offline mode. You could write an offline mode for your Vaadin application over here. And that's actually a typical use case for writing a client-side code. And for that, it makes sense quite often to only write kind of one part of your application supporting offline in client side and the rest of the application on the server side. Just because it at least triple the amount of work if you're writing an offline capable client side when you are comparing to writing the same UI on the server side. And of course, all the tooling, UI binder, and all the RPC helpers are built in as well. So another thing, windows have been refactored. You already saw that there were no window or application. And these were basically two core concepts in Vaadin 6. You always started by creating an application and window, and we are not having either anymore in Vaadin 7. And this is one of the reasons. How many of you have seen this? Oh shoot, sorry. That's actually a stupid API mistake, and it's probably because of me. We kind of thought that it's enough to have one window, and it's not. So people are using tabs all the time, and by default in Vaadin 6, you are ending up with this kind of situation if you are connecting the same window object to two different browser tabs. But there is, of course, a way of working that out in Vaadin 6, and it's unfortunately pretty complex. So you have to override this get window method and do a bit of magic in order to build multi-tab capable application. Much too complex. In Vaadin 7 it looks like this. So you just create the new UI and everything is multi-tab capable from the beginning. And the reason for this is that it basically creates a new UI every time you go into application. Point a new browser tab into your application. It creates a new UI instance. So this also means that if you're clicking reload on a web page, it actually reloads the web page. It doesn't store the state anymore. It's a new UI that you get out of that. Because this is what people expect from the web. We were fighting back, kind of trying to push this model of maintaining the state in the tab quite a while, and people just don't get it. So we changed the default. Now you get a new clean window when you are clicking refresh. No more writing restart application anymore. Of course, you can also maintain the state by adding one annotation over there. So it's pretty simple to do. Another thing is SaaS. How many of you have been using SaaS for some project? How many of you know what is SaaS? Only 1/3. So how many of you have been having troubles writing CSS-based themes for Vaadin? Okay. The challenge is that it's quite complex to write long CSS files and maintain those long CSS files, especially if there are multiple authors in the process, like somebody from the Vaadin team writing a base theme for you and you extending that theme. And over the past few years, there have been these CSS preprocessors like SAS and LESS on the market that have been adding an abstraction on top of CSS. And this is actually a brilliant thing. And we thought with Vaadin 7 that, hey, we want to have this in Vaadin as well. And then we had this rubble that there are two really popular implementations, SAS and LESS. And the SAS is based on Ruby and the LESS is based on JavaScript. And you can run that with Rhino. And we didn't want to kind of include Ruby or JavaScript dependency to Vaadin. So we did a stupid thing and decided that, hey, we are going to write this compiler from scratch. And this is exactly what we did for Vaadin 7. So there is a new Java-based implementation for SAS in Vaadin 7. It's not complete, but it's far enough that we can use it for theming. So it gives you a couple of things. First of all, you get variables and functions in CSS. So you could declare like blue is this color over here, and then you can reuse this blue all over the place. Or you could even do calculation with that. Let's make a bit darker blue for our other gradient. And as you can imagine, if you are declaring this variable in the main theme and you want to kind of change all the colors over all the widgets in the theme, it's quite handy when you are just changing one piece of code over the CSS instead of going through the files and calculating those gradients by hand. Another thing is mixins. Basically here you can kind of structure your CSS in a way that you can reuse pieces of CSS. Basically over here you create the mixin and then you start including those mixins within your CSS. So this way you can create structure in CSS that you can reuse all over the place in your theme. There is nesting. This is just a kind of simplifying how you type. So instead of typing, let's say, font size, you can kind of group these together in font. Or you could also group together selectors. So instead of typing two different rules over here, you could kind of inherit or kind of put these inside each other, and it kind of expands it. Let's not go there. Okay, the redesigned forms, this we mentioned already. In Vaadin 6, it's quite simple to build a form out of an bean. So we just take a bean, wrap it as a bean item, connect this to a form data source, and we get the form. But there is also a dark side to this. This is full of defaults, and those defaults are wrong. Nobody wants to have like birthday first and then first and last name, and maybe they want to have a bit better formatting for this. And what happens is that you end up writing, so they want to have it in a different order. And in the end of the day, you end up writing these form field factories that customize how the fields are created. And it's actually quite complex. You have to kind of, instead of writing that form directly, you have to write a factory that factors those fields that are plugged into your form. And this is quite complicated in many projects. So we kind of started from scratch in Vaadin 7. And there we actually are doing forms in such a way that you write it explicitly. You created, let's say, grid layout, or in our case, we created a custom component in the demo. And then you can just bind the items to that form with the field group, as we did. So it kind of turns the control around and makes it more explicit. Also, you can add validators as tier 303 validators in those beans. We are also making conversions explicit. So instead of getting some kind of representation out of toString in a field, you actually can write those converters. So for example, in this case, if the string presentation on the screen would be that, we could have a bean with 2 different properties inside it, representing a person. And then we can create a text field converter and set this converter explicitly to text field. And only thing that this converter can do, it kind of converts from string into a bean and back. So it's like really simple way of setting those explicitly. You could set these for fields, you could set these for whole application, whichever, it's up to you. And there are many converters built into Vaadin, so it should be working nicely out of the box for the most of the time. Communication layer is fully renewed. So in Vaadin 6, we had this kind of philosophy of painting things on the screen. So these components on the server side, they were just sending kind of instructions on how to paint the state of the UI on the screen. It was quite okay, and people were able to build over 200 plugins with that. But there are many things that we could do better, because this has been originally designed for creating static web pages with XSLT in 2002, and it's kind of have lived for 10 years. And in Vaadin 7 we kind of modernized the whole thing. So now we have totally separate Google Web Toolkit widgets on the top. This has nothing to do with the server side. In order to connect these to the server side component, you create a connector. And what this connector is doing is basically mirroring the state of the server side component to the widget and sending events back. So there are 2 ways, RPC mechanism, and also there is a state mechanism, so that you can create a composite object on the server side, and all the state is automatically copied to the client side. So you don't have to do anything for it, and you can just access those with static typing on both client and server side. I'm not sure go to the examples too deeply. One more thing, there are JavaScript-based add-ons. So this means that you can actually easily publish sorry. You can easily publish JavaScript APIs from the server side. This is mostly for integrating with existing systems. Let's say you put Vaadin UI on a static web page, or let's say a struts-based web page, and you want to communicate inside the web page in JavaScript. So you just publish this callback here on the server side Java code, and then you can call this on the web page with JavaScript, and this call gets routed to your code on the server side. You can also implement widgets fully in JavaScript. So instead of writing Java-based widget with Google Web Toolkit compiler, you can write a piece of JavaScript, basically say the class name of the server-side component over here, and implement this connector part. So this just connects existing JavaScript component, in this case jQuery plot component, to a server-side Java component. So it works in such a way that whenever the state is changed on the server side, this function is executed, and then it somehow updates or moves that data to this JavaScript component. And whenever events happen in JavaScript, you can just call server-side methods directly. And these methods are published here on the server-side code. So this is just an extension abstract JavaScript component, and that's it. These are 2 things that you have to implement: JavaScript connector and the server-side class. So how do you get started? Go to vaadin.com, see tutorials over there. I think that the easiest way to get started with Vaadin 7 is just create a new project with archetype. So it creates a new project that you can deploy and start modifying. Or you could download the tutorial that we walked through, or the demo application that we walked through from GitHub as well. You can download Eclipse plugin. If you want to try Vaadin 7, start with the experimental Eclipse plugin, so it has support for Vaadin 7. So it can be found from this URL. Just add /experimental there. there is a book of Vaadin. It's currently being rewritten for Vaadin 7, so it's not fully done yet, but there is a draft copy available. You can download it from web for free, and we also had some copies on our expo booth. I'm not sure if there are any left. And kind of easy way of getting started with Vaadin 6 is this on Refactor about getting started with Vaadin 6. So, do we have time for questions? Anyone? Yes?
About Vaadin 6 applications and Vaadin 7 UI and Zerable. I saw that you were using Zerable.
Yes.
As far as I know, in Vaadin 6 you have to restart the application to see notifications. Is this still needed in Vaadin 7?
No. So in Vaadin 7, when you reload web page, it creates a new UI by default. You can also, by adding an annotation, say that, hey, I want to keep the state for the web page, so it uses the same old UI object on the server side, but the default is that it creates a new one, and you don't have to explicitly ask to restart the application. Yes? Oh, that's a story. We are. Yes. So the client-side debugging was the question. So we are building on top of Google Web Toolkit. So everything available for Google Web Toolkit is there. So basically, dev mode, you can use dev mode with Vaadin. That's quite typical. And now with the new Google Web Toolkit 2.5 and Vaadin 7, there is a built-in super dev mode that is fast compilation from Java to JavaScript. And this is something that I recommend for you to try out today, even though it's still marked like as experimental. It's really, really cool way of debugging, because it basically only compiles the changes that you have made to Java classes really fast, and then you have like real JavaScript implementation in your browser. And if you happen to use Chrome browser, it has this feature called source maps. So it actually shows, instead of a JavaScript inside the web browser, the original source code in Java. So you can walk through your original Java-based source code in Chrome browser, even put breakpoints in there and see what happens. And this is really nice, because then you have like real world performance from the web browser, not like simulated as it was in dev mode. Yes?
Would it be compliant with Java 8 Lambda?
I guess it is compatible. I haven't tried it out. And in Vaadin, you are creating so many anonymous inner classes that lambdas are badly needed. That's what people are using in Scala all the time.
It will not be compliant with Google Web Toolkit by default?
Yeah, on the client side not. So on the client side, the lambda wouldn't be working because there is a real compiler. On the server side, we are using just JVM, so and real JVM, real compiler, so it's everything in Java should be working out of the box. Yes. Okay, but thank you everybody for coming, and I'll be around at the expo area for any more questions.